Hey everybody, let's talk communication. Communication. Interesting statistics about communication in the workplace. Oh, frankly, in life. The average worker spends 50% of his or her time communicating. Say that's not possible. Really? Think about it. Interpersonal communication, verbal, non-verbal communication. How about this one in a meeting? That's communication. Email, written communication. So much of what we get done and do personally and with others is all based on our capacity and ability to communicate. Business success is 85% dependent on effective communication and interpersonal skills. How can that be? Because either you're going to do the work or I'm going to do the work. Especially in difficult economic times where budgets are lean, we've got to work collaboratively. We've got to work in team settings. We've got to work with multiple stakeholders to get things done. And if you're a person that completely relies on your own capacity and horsepower to get things done, you ain't going to get much done. Not today. We've got to be able to communicate. 45% of time spent communicating is listening. Listening. And we don't just listen with our ears. We listen with our eyes. We listen with our gut, our intuition. Those are all ways that we capture information and process information. We'll talk about listening in just a moment. Writing represents 9% of communication time. Now, you know what? I looked at that stat by the researchers and I thought, you know what? That's a little older stat because so much is texting and so much is typing on your email. And does that fall into writing? I'm sure that it does. I'm sure that number is going up, especially for my 19-year-old daughter and her two thumbs. A remarkable 75% of the interpersonal communication that happens, that face-to-face, is non-verbal. How about that? Can you pick up on those non-verbal clues? Are you keyed in? At the end of this discussion, I'm going to give you an exercise to do that will help you begin to really clue in on the nonverbal side. Well, this isn't a new subject matter. This isn't something that just came to be. All of a sudden there was all kinds of discussion about effective communication. No, it's been being discussed since the beginning of time. Look at what even Aristotle, our boy, my man, Airy, that's what they knew back then in the day. They called him Airy. How do you know that? I don't know. I made it up. Anyways, Airy, my boy, he said that there had to be a communication process, that there was one in play. And the more you were aware of the process, the more effectively you could communicate. The less aware of the process, the less intentional you would be in the effectiveness of your communication. He said that there was a sender, that was the speaker. He said then there was a message, and then there was a receiver. Sender, message, receiver. And that all communication wasn't based on the sender. It was based on the receiver. And whether they got it or not. Makes sense, right? Well, I looked at Aristotle and his process, and I said, you know what? I think that's a little lacking, Airy. I think, Airy, you may have left some things out. Ian, how could you be so presumptuous to challenge our boy Aristotle? Cocky kid from the street, I guess. Here's what I think the communication process is about. First, there is the sender. Then there is that message and messaging. But then there's also a conduit. There is always a conduit. And whether that conduit is verbal, whether that conduit is nonverbal, whether that conduit is written, hard copy, or text or virtual, whatever that conduit is, there's always a conduit. Then the receiver, that person who hears. Now, hearing, as I said a moment ago, isn't necessarily just through our ears, but the receiver, the listener. Then, understanding. Was the intended messaging received in the way that it was intended to be received? And then there's the effect. Effect. I may have received and it may have gotten to me, but the way it was intended, but no effect. That's when you send out the memo and nothing changes. That's when you have the meeting and nothing changes. That's when you have the coaching session and the dialogue and the come to Jesus meeting with that employee and nothing changes. No effect. So to me, the communication process is a little bit more than old Aristotle talked about. Sender, message, conduit, receiver, understanding, and effect. That's the communication process. So let's unpack it now. Let's pick it apart a little bit, and let's try to help us better understand the communication process so that we can be more effective in causing the effect that we hope to achieve. All right? Let's unpack it. Here we go. Now, first of all, why is it so hard to listen? Let's start with that. Why is it so hard to listen? For you to listen, for others to listen, why is it so hard? Well, first of all, hearing and listening are not the same thing. Hearing is the act of perceiving sound. Oh, listen, there's a sound. Oh, listen, there's a bird chirping. Oh, listen, that dog barked all night. That dog barks all night. Every night, somebody killed the dog. PETA, please do not call. I'm not advocating the killing of dogs, but the dog that lives just 3 doors down from me, I would like to kill that dog. Or I'd like to kill the people that own the dog, because obviously they have earplugs or are deafened because they cannot hear their own dog bark. Say, Ian, you sound a little grumpy about that. Never mind. All right, I get off track. Let's come back. Hearing is the act of perceiving sound. Listening, is a selective activity. Talk to my children. Listening is a selective activity which involves the reception and the interpretation. It involves transitioning sound into meaning. Now, in this, we're thinking of these terms. But I would suggest to you that we can use this for the same. That nonverbal, we transition what we see into meaning. Or as we read a text, we transition it into meaning. Or the lack of words or the lack of action, we transition into meaning. Are you listening? Listening, listening, listening. We listen with all of these senses to what is being said and not said, and we translate them into some kind of meaning. The big boss walks by you and doesn't say a word. We translate that into some meaning. We go back to our office, redo our resume, and start hitting send. Perhaps. There's all kinds of messaging. Are we listening? People speak at 100 to 175 words per minute. But they listen intelligently at 600 to 800 words a minute. Since only part of our mind is paying attention, it's easy to drift. Like right now, you're drifting. What are we going to have for dinner tonight? I don't want broccoli. I got to pick up my kids. I got to do this. What are we doing this weekend? No. Oh, what's Ian saying about listening? Seriously. That's why, one of the reasons right there of why listening is so challenging. So the first step in this communication thing is, are you listening? Again, I'm going to give you a challenge at the end of this dialogue to see if you're effectively listening, because that's the first step in effectively communicating. All right, now let's break down, with that as a foundation, a backdrop. Now let's break down myself and Aristotle, me and Ari, and our perspective on this communication process. First, the sender. The sender. You are the sender. I think it's important to understand your preferred communication style. Now, be clear. There was a time and a day when I would have to say to an employee or say to those followers, you will bend to my communication style. Those days are gone. Every other institution that those that you lead interface with are used to accessing information and communicating the way they choose. No, Ian, what do you mean? Really? You can point and click, or you can call. You can walk into a store, or you can do everything virtually. You can use your thumbs, or you can use video. There's so many different avenues for communication to occur in a person's personal life, and they can dictate it. I can call the insurance company. I can text and chat the insurance company. I can walk into the insurance company. I can chat online with the bank. I can call the bank. I can walk into the bank. Stop and think about it. And do you think that us asking our followers to bend to our communication style is going to be effective today? No, it's not. So we've got to be able to bend to our followers, which is a fundamental shift if we want to effectively communicate. So let's look at our style as an attempt to understand other people's styles. First, fact-based. Some of you are fact-based communicators, linear thinkers. I want the facts. Give me the numbers. Don't give me the fluffy nonsense. Fact-based communicators, linear thinkers. Second, emotion. Some of you communicate based on how you feel right now. Nothing wrong with that. None of these are right or wrong. But how do I feel right now? And that's how you communicate. You know others that do the same. Values-based. Some of you have a set of values developed throughout your life, and it is through those set of values that you filter all information out and in. And you make judgments, statements, you take action through the filter of those values. Again, not right or wrong, not good or bad, just is. And then belief. The belief-based communicator has a set of core beliefs. And it is through those set of core beliefs that they filter what they hear through all the senses, and they transition or transmit information through those core beliefs. Now, what's the difference between values and beliefs? Belief. I believe this thing to be true. I don't care what you say. And you could say a million things, but I believe this thing to be true. And so they filter all communication through those things that they believe to be true. Values can be a little bit different. Values is about how I act and the core code of conduct that I adhere to for myself. Not what I spout out, but actually what I adhere to for myself. Now, why is it important? That's important because if I understand my communication style as a starting point and begin to look at other people's communication styles, I can start to adjust mine to meet theirs. If I work and there's a stakeholder that's a fact-based communicator, it's going to do me no good to approach them with an emotion-based argument or emotion-based assertion. Or in a meeting when we see a value-based communicator start to communicate with the emotion-based communicator, that's a recipe for a train wreck, right? The sender. Let's continue on the sender. Nonverbal communication. Eye contact. Are you making eye contact? Do you make eye contact? Do you look at your computer screen or your BlackBerry while you're talking to somebody? Eye contact. How much eye contact are you making? Eye contact is a funny thing. It shows confidence. It shows that you're paying attention. Looking somebody squarely in the eye as you communicate. Facial expressions. Like, here's an example. I love what you're doing. I don't love what you're doing. I could say the words, I love what you're doing, but my facial expression is, I hate what you're doing. I love what you're doing. What kind of communication are you sending with your facial expressions? Gestures. I love what you're doing. I love what you're doing. Or how about this? I love what you're doing. Sends a message. Posture and body orientation. Love what you're doing. Love what you're doing. Message. Sent. Proximity. Are you like Seinfeld, a close talker? Remember that episode from Seinfeld? Are you a close talker? Do you invade people's personal space when it's not appropriate? That sends a message. You could be saying all the right things, but because you're too close to them, they're not hearing you. Because they're worried about why you're so close. And then vocal, intonation, up, down, loud, soft. All of those things send message. Your communication style and then controlling the nonverbal aspect will help you as a sender. All right, now the message. I would suggest to you we have to be outcome-based and impact-focused in our communication. What's the outcome we hope for, and what is the impact of that outcome? Say, Ian, this is pretty deep. It has to be. So much of what we have to do revolves around communication. And if we're going to be an effective leader, we must be effective communicators. So I start with, what's my desired outcome? What do I want out of this phone call? What do I hope occurs out of this email? What do I hope occurs from this meeting, this dialogue, this interaction? Outcome-based and impact-focused. From that outcome, I'm hoping for this impact. See, once I have that, then I can ask some very simple questions. Well, how can I say that? How can I say it to get to that outcome? When should I say it to get to that outcome? Maybe the best time isn't right when they walk in the door. That might not be the best time to say it. Oh, I might want to say it, but that's not the best time to say it to get to that outcome. Where should I say it? Should I say it in front of everybody? Should I say it alone? And where should I say it? When should I say it? How can I say it? Based on their communication style. So my outcome, their style, my style, and then these questions. What could the potential reaction be? Before it comes out of your mouth, ask yourself, when I say it, how I say it this way, and where I say it, what do I think the reaction is going to be? And then actually visualize the conversation. Say, Ian, I can't do all that. Over a period of time, when you start to ask yourself these questions, you know what will happen? It will become a part of what we always talk about, 80% of our unconscious behavior. You know what? I put this on a 3x5 card. Carry it around for 4 weeks. Seriously, just set it down on your desk or in a meeting. What do I want out of this conversation? Okay, if that's what I want, what would be the best way for me to say that? When would be the best time to say it? Where would be the best time to say it? What do I think the reaction might be so I can have a good strategy on messaging? And then I'm going to visualize that conversation. Next question on the message. What would be the most appropriate conduit for me to utilize to send that message? Is it best to send that message through the spoken word and face-to-face? Is it best to send that message through the spoken word but on the phone? Is it best to send that message in writing? Does it need to be more formal? Is it best to send that message virtually? Text, email, chat. Is it best to send that message unspoken? How about this one? Sometimes I send that message to my kids just like that. And then I'll add a little verbal. We need to have a chat. I'll see you upstairs in about 10 minutes. I don't need to say anything else. My kids are like this. And here's the funny thing. You may use a combination of these conduits to get to your desired outcome. Maybe it's verbal, right? Then I follow up in what? Writing. When I start to think through the conduit of the messaging, I'm so much more impactful. When I start to think of my desired outcome first and then ask myself those simple 5 questions, I'm so much more impactful. And eventually it starts to take less time to be effective in our communication. All right, moving on. The receiver. I asked myself some questions about the receiver. The same questions I asked myself about my own communication style. Is this receiver fact-based? Is this receiver emotion-based? Is this receiver value-based? Is this receiver belief-based? See, I ask these questions before I go in to ensure that I'm, or at least mitigate the risk of missing, because I'm too busy. I'm too busy. So what are some of the barriers that could be in the way between me connecting with that receiver. Anything that prevents understanding is a barrier to communication. Many physical and psychological barriers exist. Culture, background, bias. If I'm trying to communicate through my own personal autobiography, I'm probably going to miss today. There was a day and time when I supervised only people that look like me, smell like me, talk like me, came from where I came from, but those days are gone. So I must take into consideration where these people are coming from, or where this individual is coming from. And I don't mean physically where they're coming from, but where they're coming from. That's why I must be such an effective listener. So I better understand them and then can adjust my communication style to meet their communication style. Because at the end of the day, I want to avoid barriers. Noise. Is there noise in the room? I'm probably not going to sit down in a busy restaurant to communicate something of importance. A lot of times we as leaders say, I'm going to get off campus. You know, we've talked about off campus. In other words, I'm going to get out of the workplace and we're going to go sit down and have a real, so then we go to some restaurant and it's loud and it's noisy and we think that effective communication, probably not. Noise. Ourselves, we can be a barrier to communication and the biases and backgrounds that we bring. Sometimes when I'm going to have an intense meeting with various stakeholders, the first thing I said is, okay, before we begin, let us all share the bias that we bring to this conversation. Let's all be transparent about the bias that we're bringing to this conversation so that we're all clear on the baggage we're bringing in. How about that one? Perception. Perception can be a barrier. If I perceive that you're a liar, that's going to be a barrier to communication. And wouldn't it be important that I kind of understand that you think I'm a liar? Messaging. The way I'm communicating it, the packaging of the message can be a barrier. Environment. Environment, which is beyond noise. If there's a big desk between me and you, and I'm trying to have and my desired outcome is trust, that might be a barrier to building trust with you. The context that communication happens in can be a barrier. And then finally, stress level. Stress level. It's taken me 10 years, but I'm now very aware of when to communicate things with my wife and not. But it's taken me 10 years. Because I'm a control freak. We're going to talk about this right now. And it's a train wreck. I've now realized, slow down. If she's stressed, now's not the time to talk about me wanting to buy some stuff for me. That's probably going to get voted down by the Minister of Finance, who's my wife. The Director of the Treasury, Secretary of the Treasury is not Mr. Geithner, is my wife. Stress. These are all barriers to communication. Now, it is important as we move from sender, right? Sender. And then we talk about messaging, right? We talked about messaging. Talked about conduit. Talked about receiver. So, the sender thinks through their communication style, so they're more self-aware. They come up with the message, and they ask themselves all those questions. When's the best time? How's the best time? What am I going to say? I think it through. Then I choose the appropriate conduit or conduits to communicate the message. But then I have analyzed the receiver to some extent, so to verify that what I'm going to do is going to be received or at least mitigate the risk that there's a barrier. I've looked at those barriers to enhance my success. Most communication experts stop right there. Yeah, I've communicated. Understanding. You must check for understanding. You must check for understanding. Let me say it. You must check for understanding. If the teacher says it 3 times, write it down. Too often times we don't close the communication loop. Checking for understanding ensures that we verify that the messaging and all the strategy we put into play had the intended outcome and hopefully impact. How do I check for understanding? First of all, understanding is about the receiver, not about the sender. That's a huge mistake that I used to make, which was this. I'm a really good talker. I'm sure they understand what I said. Wow, I'm so eloquent. I'm sure they were impressed by my verbal skills. You know what? They had no clue what I was talking about. Or they didn't care what I was talking about. Or they didn't like me. Or because I was communicating through my own autobiography, it went, wow. Or because I picked the wrong conduit. Or whatever. They didn't get it. And so nothing changed in my desired outcomes. The desired outcome wasn't met because I never checked for understanding. So how do you check for understanding? It's simple. You use what I call the chat. The chat is a system of discovery that helps us better understand someone's needs, wants, problems, desires, and if the intended message had the outcome we hoped for. Let's break it down. In the chat, I'm going to talk 20%, listen 80%. Now, you've gone to the workshop or seminar, we're parroting. What I understand you saying is, I think it's deeper than that. When we do talk, it will be to ask open-ended questions. So I verify that they got the essence of the communication, that they can explain it back to me, what I hoped. I paraphrase back. Yes, I can parrot back. Now, a couple key tips in this chat. Don't finish the sentence of others. That's a bad habit that I have. Don't finish the sentence of others just because you want to get on with it. That will be an immediate barrier to communication. Don't answer questions with questions. Well, that's an interesting question, but let me ask you something. That's not effective. Be aware of biases that you bring. Don't daydream as you're in this chat. Don't be thinking of something else. In other words, don't use the chat as just, well, I checked for understanding. I went through the exercise. Let me check it off my checklist. Be truly engaged with them. Do they understand? And how am I verifying that they understand? And this isn't it. Do you understand? That is not the way to do it because, of course, the answer is going to be this. Oh, yeah, I understand. I just want you to get away from me. And I want to move on with my day. Plan responses after the other person has finished speaking. That's a bad one, right? The person's talking and we're already formulating our response. So we miss nonverbal cues. So we miss the real words that they said or didn't say that give us true insight to where they're at and their feelings and whether the messaging had the outcome that you desired. Keep the conversation on what the speaker says, not on what interests you, not what interests them. In other words, keep it focused. Don't let the thing meander. Bring it back. Bring it back. It could be as simple as saying this. That is awesome. That is awesome. Now, what I really wanted to get to better understand is, do you get this new procedure? Now, if you said that, what are you going to get? Oh, I get the new procedure. So instead you say, explain to me that new procedure. What do you think the impact will be of this new procedure? What could be some of the possible downsides to this new procedure? By asking various open-ended questions, you'll start to get a true sense of did they understand the new procedure and why we're doing it. What happens when I checked and they don't understand? Now what? I got to circle back to the beginning. I circle back to the beginning. I adjust my messaging. I choose a new conduit, whatever it might be. But until I get clear understanding, I circle back to the beginning of the process. Did the understanding not occur because of the way I positioned it, messaged it, because I relied on my own communication style and didn't bend to them? Was it the conduit that I chose or the mixture of the conduits that I chose? Why was it that we didn't connect and that these outcomes that I had desired didn't happen? Finally, the effect. The effect. Final thought, the effect. See, you would think that the communication stops on understanding, but I would suggest to you that they can understand, but there was no effect. The desired outcome, was it achieved? Did the performance change? Did we institute the new procedure? Do they do what you want them to do? Whatever. Did the effect, was the desired outcome achieved? Was there any residual effect? Is there resentment? So in other words, they can change their behavior, but now they're pissed because of the way you messaged it in front of everybody. Was there a residual impact, good or bad? That's why you want to visualize this conversation and think of reaction long before, not after the fact. Crap, I didn't realize they were going to react like that. Well, you know what? If you would have just sat down and thought it through for 5 minutes, you would have come to the conclusion that's how they were going to react. You know that person. You know the situation. You know the environment. You know the history. You've been working with them for 12 years. And if you'd sat down for 5 minutes, you would have known that was not the time to say it in the way you say it in front of who you said it in front of. You know what I'm talking about? And then through that process, have you come away with a better understanding of the individual or the group to help you with the next time? Say, Ian, this is so intense, man, so much stuff. I don't disagree with you. But it's such an important part of a leader's toolkit today, especially when we have limited resources and communication is happening on the fly. Does it take time to digest this? It does. Absolutely. But let me give you a first step. First step. Look at what Og Mandino said. He said, beginning today, treat everyone you meet as if they were going to be dead by midnight. Extend to them all the care, kindness, and understanding you can muster. Do it with no thought of any reward. Your life will never be the same again. Now listen to what he's saying. He's saying focus on the person that you're communicating with. The person that happens to be in front of you either literally or virtually. With your whole heart and soul. Give them your undivided attention. Make eye contact, but also make heart contact. And that's true listening. You want to set yourself apart as a leader? You want to set yourself apart as a person? Listen. So over the next 7 days, I challenge you, listen to people like they're going to die at midnight. Give them your whole heart, your whole soul, everything you have. Listen with all of your senses to what they're saying. And then translate that into meaning. Translate it into meaning to better understand. And use that as a launching point to be an effective communicator or a person of influence with them. It's a unique approach. Beginning today, listen to the people you interact with as if they're going to be gone at midnight. That intensity level is a learned trait. And you will set yourself apart as a leader. You'll be more effective and impactful, not only in your communication, but in all that you do. I hope this helps. Ponder it and think it through. Take the notes, review this again, and you'll be a better and more effective communicator. And you'll make a significant impact, not only in your work, but in the lives of others. Take care, everybody.